So we'll go ahead and get started. I am John Geigerich. I am the board chair for Quality Care for Children, and I'm really looking forward to hosting the event today. I was excited to participate as a moderator when I understood the topic, not excited about this portion of it, which is my parents separated when I was 7 years old, and my mother raised 3 kids primarily by herself. And so there wasn't a lot of co-parenting. It was more single parenting. But also through the years, while I don't have children, I've seen other parents that unfortunately have gotten divorced or separated. And I've seen the good and the bad of co-parenting. So I'm really looking forward to participating in the discussion today and listening from the 2 experts we have. So today's Georgia Parent Power webinar, by the way, that's a mouthful, Thriving in Co-Parenting, is brought to you by our leading corporate sponsor, Carter's. For over 10 years, their support has helped to provide information and resources to families. Just great organization, great supporter of quality care for children. Now I'm just going to frame up our topic for today a little bit. According to the United States Census Bureau, over a quarter of all children under 21 have one of their parents living outside of their household. This means almost 22 million children had a parent who lived outside their household in 2018. That's when this study was from. According to Psychology Today, infants and preschool children are the group most adversely impacted by the consequences of divorce, particularly in the case of diminished parent-child relationships and exposure to parental conflict. Especially when children are very young, if they are to develop and maintain safe and secure primary attachments with each of their parents, their interactions with both of their parents need to be regular and routine, and they need to be protected from everyone's exposure of parental conflict. In order to reduce the effects of separation, both parents have to work cooperatively in the best interest of the children. But how do we make that happen? Today, we have 2 guests who will help provide some insight on this topic. I'm going to make brief introductions here. Brittney Walters is the Vice President of School-Based Mental Health at CRIS 180, located in Metro Atlanta. She is a licensed clinical social worker who aims to ensure that barriers are broken down and access to care is increased to all. Now I'll introduce Greg. Greg Gray is the CEO and founder of Renaissance Unlimited, a professional and personal leadership firm based in Atlanta. Greg is also, and the reason he's participating today, the author of Dad from a Distance, on how non-custodial fathers can still be fantastic dads. I thank each of you for joining us to share your insights on co-parenting today. Important note, the opinions, views, and resources provided are solely from the panelists and do not reflect any legal or official representation. Okay, a little bit of an overview of where we're going today. We're going to divide the conversation into 3 sections. First, we'll ask the panelists questions about co-parenting. Afterwards, we'll ask them questions that we've received from parents and registrants in advance of the webinar today. And then lastly, we'll pick questions from the Q&A section. So please make sure that you put any questions in the Q&A section, not into the chat, please. So if everybody's ready, we'll go ahead and get started. And Greg, the first question I have is for you. Can you tell us a little bit about your co-parenting history? And are there rules that need to be followed with children for co-parenting to run as smoothly as possible?
Okay, great. Thank you, John. And thank you, Quality Care for Children, for putting on this incredibly important topic and conversation. This topic is also, John, near and dear to my heart because Dad from a Distance, the book that you referenced, actually is kind of chronicles my story. So my daughter, Danielle, was at the time 5 years old when her mom and I divorced. And so, like a lot of dads that are in a situation like that, well, hopefully most dads anyway, I did not want to be that dad that people described in unflattering terms. I'll put it that way. But I had no idea what that journey was going to be like because I had never experienced it. My parents were married all the way up for 50 years. So I didn't have any framework that said what this looks like. So as we talk about this through the morning, through the webinar, part of what I'll be mentioning is not just the tactics, but how we need to get out of our own heads as parents when it comes to this as well. If there are a couple of things to think about that I think are important as we have this discussion through the lens that I'm talking about this through. The first one is this, is that the first message is to all parents, whether you're co-parenting or not. It's not about you. It's about your kids. The only way you get to be called a parent is because a little person shows up. So the idea is that this is about your children and their well-being. And I think having that as a baseline for conversations out of the gate helps with a lot of stuff. We'll talk about more of that. I'm sure there's questions that'll come up around that. The other thing that I think that's important is that co-parenting, Danielle, my daughter, was 5 when my wife and I divorced. She's 34 now. We're still co-parenting. So co-parenting doesn't stop when child support stops or when they get out of college. It is a lifelong pursuit. And so it's just like parenting, quite frankly. And Brittney will probably speak to this too, but the same things that work for parenting work for co-parenting. We just have to make up our minds to actually take the extra steps to make those things be the case. Last thing, John, is when that happened, when I became a dad from a distance, I was also traveling 30 or 40 weeks a year. So not only was I a dad from a distance in terms of our home, I was physically a dad from a distance even before that because of the traveling. And so there were some things I learned in that actually helped a little later as well.
Interesting, Greg. By the way, one of the things you said, in fact, 2 things particularly resonate with me. So I didn't mention at the beginning, but my day job is I'm a CEO and executive coach, and I have clients across the country. And the first part that resonated with me is that comment about getting out of your own head. One of the things I counsel very successful CEOs about is removing the head trash and looking at things with a fresh perspective. So that part really resonated. And the second is that co-parenting does not stop when kids are 21 or 24 or 25. I continue to have situations today. I just had one of my clients get married, and probably the most tension was around navigating one of the divorce sides of the family going through that. So some really great points there, and I look forward to hearing more as we go through the discussion today.
Sure.
Brittney, question for you. Based on your experience as a licensed therapist, what are signs to look for in young children when co-parenting is or isn't working well?
Such a great question, and probably one of the most important things to, like Greg said, frame up the discussion today. Just a little background about me. I don't personally have children, but have dedicated my life to mental health and have really found a passion for not only helping youth and families, but helping them specifically navigate really difficult circumstances. And I think Greg really framed us up to have a great conversation and normalize how families look all sorts of different ways these days. It could be that they started off traditionally and resulted in a separation and a divorce, and now we're navigating that circumstance. Or it could be that 2 people had a child and never got officially married, and we're still trying to navigate what co-parenting means. So I really appreciate that perspective. And I think as a society, we've come a long way to normalizing the different shapes and colors and forms that families take on. And I'm excited to just kind of share some insight around how to be as most successful today. The biggest thing that I like to help families and specifically parents understand is that trauma really thrives off of inconsistency. And when there is inconsistency in children's lives specifically, and at certain places of brain development, we'll see that come up and show up in a lot of different ways. So if you think about infants or toddlers or school-age children even, they don't have the verbal capacity to say, I'm really struggling with this inconsistency. I notice these things when I'm at dad's house and these things when I'm at mom's and these things when I'm at grandma's. Those things are not going to come out verbally or even logically sometimes. They're going to show up more emotionally or behaviorally more often. So things that parents should definitely watch out for are any sudden or rapid changes in mood or dysregulation or things kind of out of the norm or things that might not be age appropriate. And so it's really important to remember how quickly children are developing through the lifespan at those formative years, that tantrums are normal. Some disagreement and opposition and defiance is absolutely normal. So parents really want to focus on anything outside of that normal realm for their child, and things that might be kind of, again, that rapid kind of corner turn that they hadn't seen before. Certainly an increase in defiance or opposition, it could be age appropriate, but it could be a sign of testing limits. So specifically for kids that might be going in between inconsistent households, not only are they going to be testing limits or testing that other parent, but they're also going to be trying to seek ways to increase things that they have control over. This is a circumstance when parents separate that they don't have a lot of control over, or really any control. So it's completely normal for kids to try to exert control in other situations that feel more natural to them. It could be that they start to bully peers or start to push kids down on the playground. We've seen everything from behavioral and social and peer challenges to skin picking or biting their nails, and that had never occurred before. So anything where kids are kind of either testing those limits or seeking out to control their environment could be a red flag that they're experiencing some inconsistency in their daily life. And then, of course, fear of being away from a specific parent or a sudden onset of any separation anxiety. If your kiddo normally transitions very well from activity to activity or from morning routine to school time routine, and all of a sudden there's an increase in anxiety or tantrums around those transitional times, that could be a sign that they're really trying to cling on to that parent for that security and safety feeling that they might be struggling to find in this new circumstance, based on what's going on within the family.
Interesting, Brittney, as you were talking about control. I'll just share a little personal story. Again, my parents separated when I was 7 years old. And this goes to your point around they want to be in control of what they can control. And I came up with a game in my head that when people were talking to me, when I heard a sentence, I would divide the words in that sentence into two different teams, the odd team and the even team. And I would constantly play a game where I was seeing who won, the even team or the odd team. And I thought it was a sign of my genius. And someone pointed out to me years later, in fact, it was a sign that you were trying to control what you could control. And under stress, you were playing the game. So I don't do that any longer, but it really fit as maybe an odd example of children wanting to have control of what they can have control of. Okay. Let's go back to Greg for a question. In your book, Dad from a Distance, you talk about things to remember for dads who want to enhance their role in their child's life. What would you say is the most important thing to remember for non-custodial parents who want to be involved in their child's life?
Okay, so that is the most important, because there's like two that are a tie in my mind. But I will tell you, just from the non-custodial, custodial parent thing, maybe the most important thing is that Your child should never hear you speak ill of the other parent under any circumstances whatsoever. Kids don't miss anything. They pick up even on the subtlest clues. If someone mentions the other parent and you roll your eyes, kids notice those types of things. And so that would be one of the most important things. Never speak ill. I don't care how, again, it's not about you. Never speak ill of the other parent. Another thing would be is because sometimes, well, in my case, I had to kind of announce to my 5-year-old daughter what was going on when I left the house. One of the things that I would have done differently, and I would suggest that anybody is in a similar situation or they see it on the horizon, because a lot of times we do see it coming, is I told my daughter that mommy and I don't love each other anymore. I should never have done that. And I'll tell you why, because when I talked to older daughter later, to Brittney's point, she didn't know how to process that. But what she did get from it is that if love can leave you and mommy, then it can leave me too. So now she was afraid that the same thing could potentially happen to her and I. So mommy and I are happier when we live apart. So you frame it in a more positive sense versus talking about what was taken away. So those two things I think are hugely important. If there was a bonus round here, John, I would say it is to be present. It's a lot easier to be present now than it was 29 years ago when my daughter was 5 years old. But even then, if there is, you show up at everything, including parent-teacher conferences, including every play, including every T-ball game, no matter what it is, every recital, every graduation. Sometimes, and I speak really kind of more from the dad's point of view, because the fact is, most moms tend to be custodial when it comes to the kids, is that dads sometimes avoid those settings because they're trying to avoid mom, or trying to avoid mom's family or mom's friends. I don't want to be part of the drama. But again, John, that's me being in my head, because my daughter told me later, in fact, she wrote the foreword to my book when she was 22, which was, I think, the best part of the book. She remembered that I was there, and she remembered always looking for me, even before she could tell me that's what she was doing. So being present, being respectful of the other parent, and making sure that your kid knows that love is not something that can fall away from them. But that sometimes people are happy in different settings, which is a good lesson for kids to know too.
Yeah, that's really interesting. By the way, one of the things that stuck out there for me links into something you said earlier, which is whether it's co-parenting or parenting, and then I link that to presence. So there's an author who I love named John Gordon, who's married, has children, number of books. Frankly, I recommend every one of his books, but I saw him give a speech one time. And one of the things he talked about was his speaking business was hugely successful. His book business was hugely successful. And he called home and he's talking to his wife one time, and he realized everything at home was not good. Nothing was going well, and he had a moment for himself to realize, yes, I'm successful as an individual, but I'm the leader of my team, and my team is dysfunctional and not performing right now. So I'm going cold turkey on the road. I'm going back home, and I'm committing to being present until we're operating the way that we should be operating as a family unit. So I think I really liked the way you laid that out. Brittney, what tools or methods can parents use to explain to a child why the other parent is not in the household, or why they visit the other parent?
A great question again, John. You're really challenging me today, but I appreciate it, because these are kind of the tough topics that I think people want and need more advice on and more guidance, because it looks different family to family. And so if we go back to the beginning of this webinar, you asked Greg about one of the rules, or what are those kind of core foundational rules that people should follow? And one of the largest ones is an umbrella term under, communication. And Greg has shared nicely the importance of setting that priority and that intention, that at the end of the day, what we're working toward together, even though I might have ill feelings toward this person, at the end of the day, what matters is this child's well-being and emotional health. And so, that's really kind of the North Star for folks. And sometimes setting that North Star as a joint venture between co-parents can really help them kind of figure out the journey as to how to get there together. So one of the biggest things I always tell people is we've got to work on getting to the understanding that this is a joint venture. The mentality and the messaging of we're in this together, and we still are a family. We might not be married and we might not be living in the same household, but we are tied and bonded for exactly what we've been saying for life, really. Not until that child's 18, not until they're 21, not until they fill in the blank. Each family might have their different kind of philosophies around when does a child become an adult, but every human needs their parents for as long as humanly possible while they're on this earth. So going into it as a joint venture and having that foundational understanding and agreement can really help avoid different stories or, some of those more biased perspectives or opinions of the other person come out during heated moments. And it can really avoid creating a lot of confusion. The other thing that's really important is timing. So, this is not something that's a checkbox. It's not something that you can have a conversation around and then just move through life, thinking, well, we talked about that and everything's good. Children are constantly developing new senses of self, new senses of their world and their surroundings, new senses to what Greg said about what does love mean? And if, mommy and daddy can fall out of love, how is that going to impact not only her relationship with, her parents, but future relationships? So as the brain is always developing, our conversations should be evolving as well with age appropriate language and concepts. Little ones really need concrete black and white facts. They can't really process kind of all of the other more adult concepts as maybe, they will be able to as they grow older. So timing is critical. Also, thinking about conversations, don't rush the conversation. Don't try to go into it right before school or right before an activity or an event where they're going to be expected to focus or complete a task. Really being mindful of, we're going to have this conversation, and then does my child have the emotional space and bandwidth to process kind of what we talked about? So not before church, where they're going to be expected to sit maybe quietly and focus on whatever's going on in that house of worship, but really maybe after school or on a weekend where they can really decompress and think about and talk about kind of how they're feeling, or offer space for kind of those follow-up questions. Greg's already mentioned this, but avoiding the blame game is really critical. And let me be honest, it's just about the hardest thing we can ask adults to do. When we've been wronged or when we're hurting, we need something or someone to blame. And so holding that in and finding adult outlets and not letting that sift into your everyday realm is a tall order. And I don't want anybody to misconstrue that that's an easy thing to do. It's probably one of the hardest things to do when you're entering into a co-parenting situation. And then the last thing is, as you have these conversations, vulnerability can be really a powerful tool. It's great to have answers, but it's also equally as powerful to say, I never thought about that, or I haven't thought about that, or that's something mommy would really like to talk with daddy about because I don't know the answer to that. Showing kids and modeling vulnerability and that you don't have all the answers can not only, model really good human behavior and normalize the fact that we don't know everything, but it can also reassure them that mommy and daddy are talking about this, or I can bring something to the conversation and they'll think about it. So those would be kind of my tips for having any type of difficult situation. And especially, when they ask questions about the other parent, just kind of normalizing that emotional process, creating that space.
John, Brittney just hit on some pure gold. Would you mind if I just tried to piggyback off of what's her wisdom?
Oh, go for it.
So the conversation is difficult. I can tell you because I had that conversation. But I think having it, because I'm guessing people are probably thinking, so what do I actually say to the other parent? I think you just say, here's what I said, and it kind of worked, I think, was, look, I know what we have didn't work. I know you're upset with me. I'm upset with you. I know that there's a lot of hurt on both sides, and rightfully so, but that does not belong to Danielle. And I am committed to making sure that no matter how you and I feel about each other, that Danielle will never want for anything. She will never feel as though she is without parents at any point in time. So you and I are probably going to have our scruffs at some point in time, but I promise you that I will not bring that to Danielle. And I hope that you can make the same commitment not to bring it to Danielle as well. So the reason I think that can work, John, is because I'm saying I'm owning my part of it. I'm not saying you need to make sure you keep my name out of your mouth when you talk to Danielle.
Yeah.
I'm committing to doing this. And if I do it, you know, there's this rule of reciprocity that tends to have people respond in like and kind is really important. The other thing is, you know, we're talking about co-parenting, you know, in terms of parents separating. I've had as many conversations similar to this with parents where one parent is on deployment in the military. So a lot of the same, because at home, there's certain rules that get set, and then that parent comes home and they may not know all the rules that have been set while they were on deployment. So that communication piece is really, really key. And for those of you who know, sometimes you still have issues with the other person. Not speaking ill of that person and being respectful can sometimes inoculate your child from incoming negative messages on the other side. Because if dad never says anything bad about mom, but mom says bad things about dad, the kid, John, has, okay, so something about this is not right because he doesn't say that about mom. So it can actually help you maintain a space that doesn't feel like it's, you know, they're watching a war, but it's something. And last thing is this, you were asking about, or talking about, I'm sorry, I'm rambling here, but Brittney, you just lit so many fires in my mind. One of the things you need to be prepared to say to your child, even if they're 5 years old, is this: I'm sorry. If you make a mistake, if you did something, don't try to negotiate yourself out of it with you hurt my feelings, daddy. I'm sorry, baby, because that was not daddy's intention. Because we tend, even grown up to grown up, have a hard time with the whole apology game. But kids need to understand that you know where they are and that you have enough empathy to be able to lean in and say that. So, all right, I'm going to stop talking now. Brittney, stop bringing up so many great points. I won't do that.
But by the way, I actually love that, Greg. And when you talked about military deployment, or it links to the story I had about John Gordon, who's just on the road all the time. You can face the challenges, even if the couple's together, but just physically separated. But by the way, I have to do this because I can't control myself. And Brittney, I'm going to start with you, and then I'll go to Greg. As I was thinking through the dialogue, a question we didn't ask is, what about when you're co-parenting and you're not the parent? So, you know, oftentimes you find someone else. So now we've brought someone else into the relationship with the child. So Brittney, what advice would you give in that situation, or insights might you have?
Absolutely. And look, you know, I'm the biggest advocate for everybody needs love. So I think the first piece is to do some work on yourself whenever a relationship ends and decide what you want for your own future. As an adult, we all need to do that work. And when you make the decision to enter into another relationship, really kind of doing a values assessment can be powerful in helping you decide or look at different relationships and what you want out of the next one that maybe didn't work from the first one. I think it's hard to tell you exactly when is the appropriate time to introduce a new partner to a child. I can't totally tell you what that timeline is or how many weeks or months the experts recommend, but what I can say is it should be a conversation with the other parent prior to introducing them. If we're going to try to increase respect and be collaborative and be communicative and be inclusive, then you want to start off on the right foot. I don't know any parent of any gender that would feel good about hearing that from their child that they were introduced to mommy or daddy's or mommy's new girlfriend or boyfriend. That should come from the other parent of that child ahead of time, as much as you can. And then once you do that, it's really kind of the same thing. You want all of the grownups to be on the same page, or when we start family therapy with blended families, what we'll say is at least in the same chapter. Let's just get to the same chapter first, and then we can work toward getting on the same page, because let's be honest and let's be real, that does not happen overnight, especially if the reason for a separation or a divorce was related to something like infidelity. There's gonna be some feelings there. So as adults, we've got to do our own work first and make that conscientious decision to, once again, redefine that North Star and recommit when new grownups kind of join the pod, recommit to the child's well-being being the first priority. The other thing I love to share, and it blows people's minds because it feels very elementary, but when we start family therapy with blended families or families that look different or new partners kind of come into, again, that family system, we really do go back to the basics. And so even when certain parenting techniques might feel common sense or inherent to parenting, it's really important to still talk about it, because what is common sense to me and the way that I grew up might not be common sense to my ex's new partner, and they might have a completely different worldview or paradigm around those common sense parenting practices. So, sometimes we're able to move through that segment really quickly around that back to the basics, and other times we'll spend 3, 4, 5, 6 sessions, as long as it takes, to get through even what one would consider just kind of fundamental beliefs around parenting. And that's okay. But don't be afraid to go back to the basics, and don't be afraid to hold off on diving into really kind of deep-rooted parenting philosophies before you really kind of set that foundation. The other thing that, can be helpful for a bonus parent is, instead of saying to that bonus partner, bonus parent, whatever terminology we're using, you need to do this because that's the way my child likes it, or you need to do this because that's how me and dad do it, is trying to explain the benefit of doing that way as opposed to exerting control over another adult. So a good example of this might be, a bedtime routine. He really requires a bathroom break, then a glass of water, and then exactly 3 stories. And if you don't do 3 stories, he's not going to be able to fall asleep. And if you don't do this, he's going to wake up in a few hours. We have this routine. You have to follow it. That feels very intrusive, even though it's your child. I'm an adult. I want to do a great bedtime routine also. But perhaps a different way that somebody could share that is, we've noticed he's been really struggling when we don't stay consistent. And even small things like I was doing 3 stories and dad was doing 2, we noticed he was having a lot of sleeping issues. And so we've both agreed to do 3 stories because Johnny sleeps better. And we've noticed when we increase our consistency, he does better. So you're saying the exact same thing, but the focus is on the child's well-being. It's not, you have to do this because this is how I do it and I'm his mom. But you're saying the same thing and the outcome is hopefully going to be the same. And just that shift in language, keeping the focus on the child's well-being, can really help all grown-ups get not only to the same chapter, but hopefully on the same page.
Okay, Brittney, there's some fantastic stuff in there. Greg, I actually have a specific question for you. So
Okay.
I know you've got some thoughts and expertise on the dialogue that you have at the beginning of co-parenting, which could be with partners or without partners. So I'm interested in your insights on that.
So I would, once again, the expert that Brittney is had brought up something that, and she said it quickly, but I want to say it again because I think it, to make sure nobody passes over it. Kid or no kid, after a breakup, you need to get yourself together first. I don't care what it is. I mean, we've heard all the stories about people getting in relationships on the rebound too quickly and all these other types of things. So without a child even, you need to really get you need your space to be fixed. There's another thing that I would introduce though, even before, the co-parenting or bonus parenting conversations, because I'm in a blended family now. In fact, my wife now, we have 3 kids between us. That's how we describe it, as a matter of fact. But we never say she has 2 kids, I have 1 kid. We have 3 children. So language, as Brittney said, very important. But from my wife's point of view and my point of view, before we even, got very far, this was the conversation. Okay, so I'm a dad. Danielle is my daughter. You don't compete with her. Just so you know, there is no competition. So if you ever put yourself in a situation where you're trying to get me to pick, I'm telling you right now, you're going to lose, and we're going to lose this relationship, because I started with her, she comes with me. So making it very clear up front that before we even start this relationship where you may become a bonus parent, that you understand where I stand and where my child rests with me in terms of my priority. I think that's really important, because a lot of times people don't find this out until later, because they've never had that conversation up front because they're afraid to scare this new person away. Well, if you can scare them away with that, Brittney, they should be scared away. That's actually, you did yourself and them and your kid a favor. I think the other thing about the, even before, and I'm kind of pivoting this, John, into the bonus parent thing too, is that in the interim, and I'm speaking from a dad's point of view. I've done a bunch of seminars, by the way, on this dad from a distance thing, and you'd probably be surprised, or maybe not, to hear half the people that come are women who are trying to help their sons or their brothers or their uncles work through stuff too. Is not to try to be what I call Disney dad, which is, in the time that you have, the kid, they have 2 bicycles, and we go to Six Flags every weekend and all these things that I probably would not have done that way had we not separated, but I'm overcompensating for the amount of time that I have, and the reason I pulled that up is because if that happens, then that really puts a lot of stress and strain on her mom, because well, dad got me a new bicycle. Okay, well, and all of a sudden now there's comparisons, and that inconsistency that Brittney was talking about is just really screaming out loud. So I think having a real honest, critical, crucial conversation up front, which is something that adults have a hard time doing under a lot of circumstances, is important. It's not going to be easy. It just isn't. The conflict with the co-parent, what is the best way? Are we going to this question now, or you're steering this ship here, John? So tell me where you want to go.
Yes, you can handle that one.
Okay, so the best way to handle a conflict with a co-parent is to always bring it back to the baseline of the best interest of the child, always. So, I don't like the way you did X, Y, or Z, or I don't like the, okay, so tell me, how we handle this that is best for Danielle. That's how the conversation should always start, because even if we don't like each other, we do have her in common, or we have him in common if we have a son. And it takes, it helps people pull the talons back, because I'll put my talons into you, but I won't put my talons into my kid. So, all right. And by the way, apologizing in this space if you need to, because there's some apologies still. In fact, there may be part of why you're not together anymore is because there weren't enough apologies along the line. But I did not mean for that to hurt you, because I've had conversations with every parent co-parenting situation this has happened, where they had a conversation with the kid and the kid took that conversation back to the other parent and the other parent felt some kind of way about it. For me, it was something as simple as, you can spend more time here if you want to, versus, you don't have, just doesn't have to be, you can come right, because we all lived in the same area. She would have gone to the same elementary school, middle school, and high school. We lived that close in proximity. But I have to be careful about that, because now mom hears, oh, so you want her to live with you, not me. So those kind of conversations are tricky, but you've gotta keep the pipeline open as much as possible around, but it always starts with what's in her best interest or what's in his best interest. Always start there, because the shields will drop a little bit more if that's the case. So that worked well for me for a couple of decades.
That's fantastic. By the way, thinking of the comments just from you and Brittney, one of the things that popped into my mind is something that I talk to executives about, and that is expectations versus agreements. So when we have the conversation at the beginning and we have it ongoing, it's making clear we have an agreement, not just expectations, so that we can hold each other accountable to parenting and communicating the way we agreed, Greg, to use your term, with the best interest of the child in mind. I love that.
Yep.
Brittney, a question for you that will pop up on the screen. I think it's going to pop up on the screen. What is the best way to co-parent when one parent lives in another state or very far away?
Thanks for that, John. Absolutely. Guys, it's 2022. So it's happening. I mean, not only is it happening for very happy couples that are married, you guys have both spoken about men and women and all sorts of people that have jobs that require travel these days. So this could be for a household that is still married and they're balancing co-parenting, or it could be a result of separation or divorce. I'm always going to come back to, it's important for us grown-ups to do our own work before engaging in conversations that we're not totally sure about. So there's a difference between walking into a conversation blind with our own raw emotions about how we feel that person moved away, or how we feel about that person being on the road constantly, versus doing our own work and going into a conversation and being okay with being vulnerable and saying, I don't know. Those really are two different things, because what happens for adults when we don't process our own feelings around, or those narratives that are very valid, of feeling, well, I carry the brunt of this household. I don't have any support. They're only here 2 weeks out of the month. That leaves me basically being a single parent. All of those narratives can really influence the language and the way that we talk with our kids. So I'm always going to come back to that foundation of doing our own work. And again, one helpful tip for somebody, listen, it's valid. You really might be carrying all of the brunt except for 1 weekend a month because they've moved out of state. And that's really, really hard. A way that you can reframe that is, again, putting that child at the forefront of your North Star and remembering your child's emotional health and well-being is still going to be better off if both parents are supportive of one another, not talking ill of one another, and if they have as much access to that person as possible. And so normalizing feelings of it's not fair, or why do they have to live there, creating that space for them to process everything and not shut it down. As parents, we always want to protect our kids. We don't want them to feel pain. We don't want them to feel sadness. And sometimes inadvertently, there's an unintended consequence of, no, 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 that's not true. So if a kid says they moved out of state because they don't want to be around me, and a parent immediately says, no, that's not true, don't say that, it shuts down the conversation. Even though in our heart of hearts, it pains us to hear them say that, trying some more reflective language just to help them get it out. And then you can move into more solution-focused language. But as parents, that's the number one thing that we do, because we want to shield our babies. So we'll say things like, no, 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 that's not true. Or honey, don't say that. Or no, 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 we'll try to redirect away from those more painful journeys. So I challenge all of the parents here to sit in that and sit in that uncomfortable space. Nothing great ever came from comfortable things. Some of the most amazing aha moments come from really feeling uncomfortable and being out of our comfort zone. Definitely technology, I'll say, is amazing. It's 2022. I use FaceTime all the time. All of my family, none of them live in Georgia, but I feel like I see them every day because I talk to my sister 3 times a day on FaceTime. I talk to my nieces and my nephews on FaceTime. So it doesn't feel like I'm totally missing out. Recently, my brother set up a FaceTime so I could watch my niece's recital, which was special. And could I have been there in person? Sure, that would have been great. But it is the second best. So, but it takes another grown-up to facilitate that. I can't expect my niece to do that. She's 16, but she was in the recital. I needed another grown-up to call me at the time of the recital and be willing to kind of let me in on that experience. And my niece was thrilled. I'm not her co-parent, but I can imagine how special it would be for a child if a co-parent can't make it to an event. At least they know they were watching in live time. That can be really powerful. And then the other tip I have is just planning way ahead for things like school breaks and summer and holidays. Kids that are going through uncertain circumstances like a separation, a divorce, a parent not being around as much, moving out of state, you fill in the blank. Again, it's inconsistent. They don't have a lot of control over that. And for young kids, especially, a month can feel like a year. So age appropriate language around planning and timing and getting them to be engaged in the planning. For young kids and toddlers, maybe that's making a really special calendar on when they're going to see mommy next or when they're going to see daddy next. And then they put stickers on it every day because they're counting down the days, or letting them pick out activities when they do go and visit whoever for Christmas. What are they going to do when they're there? So helping them get excited and normalizing the physical distance between 2 households, but still trying to create that emotional closeness. Those are some tips that I have.
That's fantastic, Brittney. And let's do this. You guys have been absolutely fantastic. I wish you were around to talk to my parents, or at least my father. In any event, both of them, when I was younger. So I want to try to make sure we've got about 12 minutes left. I want to make sure we're able to get questions from the audience, and they've been coming in fast and furious. Before we do that, I know we want to make sure people can fill out the survey and give us some feedback on the webinar. And so that's going to be dropped into the chat. So still pay attention right now, but you'll see a link to the survey drop in the chat. Please take that and give us some feedback. So now I'm going to introduce Tia, who's going to join us, one of the newest members of QCC. She's been monitoring the questions in the chat. She's absolutely fantastic. So Tia, come on board.
Thank you so much, John. Hi, panelists. I do have some great questions for you guys. So these questions are open to either one of you to answer. So I'll go ahead and start with the first one. My children are dealing with inconsistent households. I'm struggling to figure out ways to help my 6-year-old son, the big brother, sort out his feelings with the different family and household dynamics. I was thinking therapy or counseling, but it has been difficult finding a therapist or counselor in my area. Is there an option I should continue to work on?
I'm going to give that one to Brittney.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's really my wheelhouse, and I'm so glad that you asked that question. And first off, let me normalize, you are not alone. Everybody is trying to figure out, when do I really need to see a professional, and when is this just kind of a phase, and when can we work this out on our own versus really talking with somebody that can help us. The good thing about mental health, one of the best things, dare I say it, that's come out of the pandemic is a lot of barriers have been removed to accessing quality care. And while we're continuing to work on stigma around working with a professional, it doesn't mean that you have a mental illness necessarily. It doesn't mean that this is a lifelong problem. We're really starting to see society normalize talking with a professional during a really hard time of life and just getting some time limited or some real solution focused kind of advice and guidance. The other thing that talking with a professional can really help with is they can be the mediator, and they can help you learn better ways to express what you're feeling toward the partner. Listen, we're all adults. We've had partners where it's like talking to a brick wall. I mean, we can try and we can try and we can try, but we all know what it feels like, that feeling of I'm not getting through to them and there's nothing that I can say. So that's when a third party can be especially helpful, because they can help redefine that North Star and also help you guys kind of have those difficult situations in a safe, contained environment. In terms of access, Chris 180, we are all over Metro Atlanta, but we also provide telehealth services, and we can serve basically anybody in the state if you call our care team number, which QCC will be providing after this webinar. Outside of that, if you're ever in crisis, you can always call the statewide mobile crisis unit, which is our GCAL line, and I'll drop that 1-800 number in the chat. We're also rolling out 988 soon, which is an alternative to 911 for any true blue mental health crises that need on-site support in live time. So GCAL can help you get connected. Chris 180 would love to help you get connected. This is what we wake up to do every single day, and we are happy to help you and your family navigate.
What Brittney said.
For our next question, we have, how am I able to come up with a schedule or co-parent with my son's father who has a difficult work schedule and only wants to see our boys 2 times a month, especially when one child has special needs?
So this gets to something that we didn't really talk about yet in the earlier questions, but has been kind of bouncing around in the back of my head. And it does have kind of a third party feel to it as well. And that is, and this is not legal advice, as John mentioned at the outset, but I think personally, it's a good idea to have some things codified through the courts as to what's going to happen when and where, because then it's not you saying no or saying you need to do this. It is whatever court ordered agreement you have that says that, even with things like child support. I actually encourage guys on a regular basis that they should have legally established child support. And a lot of guys are like, I don't want to go through all of that. It's like, but if you do that, then there are rules to the road. So, and those rules to the road also have to do with how often you see your child. So I don't have to argue with the mom, or the mom doesn't have to argue with the dad as to when you're supposed to be there, because the court already tells you that. And if they're out of compliance, you don't have to be the bad guy. You can actually let the state help moderate or mediate those kind of situations. Because we get in our feelings, and I've seen some really weird situations where people just determined what the child support was going to be because they were mad. You make this much, it should be this much. Or you live in town, so you should have them X number of days a week. Well, if we're not getting along that well, you dictating to me what I should be doing with my life is probably not going to work that well either. So get something on paper that gives you guidelines as to how that's supposed to work. Greg, that might be an attorney. Yeah, that's correct. But the cost is much greater in terms of harm to your child over a lifetime if those things are too squishy.
Thank you, Greg. And we have time for one more question.
Okay.
So lastly, my partner has a daughter who wants to call me dad, but her father tells her he won't be her dad if she calls me dad. I feel this is an example of how he's manipulating the child. Although I do plan to marry the child's mom, we are not married now. Is there anything I can do for the best interest of the child?
Ooh, that's
It's squishy, as Greg said. That I think that's a new clinical term. I'm gonna have to look that one up.
you're welcome.
That's tough. I'm gonna kick that one to you, Greg. What do you think?
So naming conventions is always an interesting thing. And one of my wife's, the youngest bio kid, called me Mr. for 6 months. She wouldn't even give me a name because she's the daddy's girl of the two. And so she didn't dislike me, but she couldn't call me anything that would put me in a space that would compete with, her dad in that space. So she calls me Greg. Her older sister calls me Thomas because Thomas is my first name. She asked me, what does my best friend call? This is the kid that's been here before, for those of you who know that kid. She said, what does your best friend call you? I said, Thomas. Why? That's not your first. I said, it is my first name. So your best friend called you Thomas? I said, yeah. She said, well, I'm calling you Thomas. So when I get cards for Father's Day, one from Danielle says love, to dad, one says to Greg, one says to Thomas. I'm fine with all of those because back to the beginning conversation, John, if I'm out of my head, I'm just glad I'm getting a doggone card for Father's Day. I'm just glad. I don't care what they call me. It's just nice to be acknowledged. So naming conventions get into a lot. He's not your dad. Or even kids saying it to the parent. You're not my daddy. You're not my father. You're right. Sometimes you just say it like it is and not fight about it because there's not a need for that in terms of just call them what you want to call them. Who cares? As long as the kid is happy, that's the main thing, is the child happy.
It sounds like here, if I could just kind of jump in that, I think it sounds a little bit like a power struggle, or there's kind of an ego attached for bio dad. And to some degree, I can understand if I'm dad, it doesn't feel good to hear you call somebody else dad. And so if a conversation with all of the grownups in the pod, if you will, and that North Star discussion, like, listen, this is important to her. She's 5 or however old she is. If that doesn't work, then as a bonus partner or as a bonus parent, I would do an activity with that child and say, you know what, you already call somebody dad. I want my own unique name. Like, let's come up with something really creative. And then you can make me a card, make it kind of a game, and you be the adult and say, I'm not going to engage in this power struggle with her bio dad. I'm going to rise above it and pivot and then make something really special out of it. Sometimes you can only do so much to get people on board, and there might be some trauma or some hurt feelings there. We don't know, but what you need to focus on your kind of relationship with that child as the bonus partner or parent. It's not about the power struggle somebody else is trying to engage in with you. So capitalize on what's working well. You must be close to that child if they even want to call you dad. So make it.
That's what I was going to say, Brittney. Kids don't arbitrarily call people dad either.
Right.
And they don't choose not to call other people dad. That's not an arbitrary thing for kids. So there may be some drill down there to do as well.
So I hate to do this, but Tio, number one, thank you for fielding the questions. I think we could go on for another hour if we wanted to, but I really appreciate that. Greg and Brittney, you've been absolutely fantastic. To the audience, you can see their contact information for Brittney and Greg. This has been absolutely fantastic and valuable. And I'm taking that as someone who's now a grown adult with no children. I learned so much that frankly I can use in other facets of my life. Really some great information here. And I know we're going to pop up a screen that has contact information for other resources. Actually, survey, if you get a chance, please either use the QR code there or tap the link in the chat and take the survey. We have a slide that has information on places where you can go to for support. We'll also be sending that to you as a follow-up if you've registered, so you don't have to worry about getting that down. Carter's went up there very quick. Another great thank you to Carter's for being a fantastic supporter of quality care for children for over 10 years and making this Georgia Parent Power webinar possible for everybody. So with that, I'll close with Quality Care for Children as a not-for-profit. It's a fantastic not-for-profit helping all the children of Georgia realize their full potential. And so please, if you can, drop a donation at qccdonate.org. We would really appreciate it, and the children of Georgia would really appreciate it. We'll close with that. Again, Greg and Brittney, absolutely fantastic.